Hi, I am Eric Zimmerman, registered dietitian nutritionist of Heart Spirit Nutrition, and today I'm going to talk to you about my gluten-free romance. This is part of my journey and trip from becoming a person who worked in the business world to going gluten-free, finding my calling as a dietitian, and now moving forward to help other people. So for me, the most fundamental part of helping someone who has been diagnosed with celiac disease to become gluten-free is understanding the mental load. So what I mean by this is that it's really easy to say, I'm just going to have a gluten-free diet. It's really hard to put that into action for years and decades and make it something that's lifelong. I'm going to talk to you about the mental pieces that go into helping people to be able to do this and to thrive and flourish at the end of the mental change. And then they get to a place of being gluten-free and love it and can feel great. So how can you do that? I find it is really critically important to manage your well-being and your mental health through this process, particularly right after you've been diagnosed. Now, this could fill up PhD dissertations, and probably does, because there's a lot of pieces to this. So I'm just going to go through the bare basics to give you an idea, and you can continue to explore this if it's something that is needed or of interest to you. So I like to think about our gluten-free journey like a plant. So we think about the nutrients and the growth of this plant as a way to describe the way that we go from eating gluten to getting diagnosed and becoming gluten-free. So think of yourself as this little plant, this little sprouted plant with years left to go, having eaten gluten for who knows how many years beforehand. And it's growing, but it's not growing as well as it could. The reason for that being that it's gotten the wrong fertilizer or plant food. So the first step is, what is the fertilizer? What is the food that this plant has been given to grow with? And for someone who's just been diagnosed with celiac disease, they've probably been eating a lot of gluten, both intentionally and through cross contact with gluten containing items for their whole life, and that is what's caused that damage in the gut. So what happens when someone with active celiac disease eats gluten is basically it goes into the intestines, the body identifies it as a danger, a foreign substance, this thing we got to get rid of, so it mounts an assault, a war on the intestines. And that's how, even though you're eating and moving things through, we get the villi that absorb nutrients become blunted, and they can't absorb nutrients as well, sometimes not as at all. And that's what causes the nutrient deficiencies that manifest as active celiac disease, from stomach aches and upsets to changes in bowel habits to headaches, joint pain, on and on. There's over 300 identified different symptoms that can occur with active celiac disease. So in removing gluten, we essentially stop that onslaught. We stop the issue, and a person can live well without any active celiac disease. Now, they still have celiac disease because if they eat gluten, they're going to get sick. It's going to start that onslaught again, and that little intestinal war begins again with those nutrient deficiencies, which is why it's critical for someone who is given a diagnosis of celiac disease to work through a process of getting rid of gluten completely from their diet, because it's anytime that they ingest it, it's going to cause problems. So that's the nutrients that we're changing for this little plant. The next step is that soil. What is the surrounding environment this plant is growing in? And so I akin this to family, friends, our work environment, where you do business, socialize, church, temple, mosque, any place that we go for a religious ceremony tends to have food around it. I even went for a 5K walk, and I thought it would be a place without food. We get to the end and there's food there. There's food in every environment, and it's amazing how frequently food comes up in our socializations and interactions. And so it's really critical that we learn with this soil how to say no. How to be able to say, no, thank you, I have my own food. Or no, thank you, I have another alternative that's going to work better for my health. I really appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to eat that. Getting pressured in the soil to ingest some gluten, even small amounts, a bite, makes a difference, and it can start that celiac disease process up again. And that's why it's critical. We don't take one bite. We don't have one nibble. We don't just have a sip. We don't have a taste. It is absolutely fundamentally important to managing celiac disease because those bites and nibbles and tastes add up, and sometimes they can cause really devastating outcomes. I'll be covering what those are in another video. For now, we want to talk about making sure that the soil that surrounds your little life force as a plant is helping you to be able to live as well as possible. And the last piece is that mental load. I like to think of it as the atmosphere that surrounds the rest of the growth of this plant. We've got the gluten-free diet in place. We've got the right soil, the right fertilizer. We've got everything there. You still have to deal with the grief process. So for some people, they equate sunny skies to happiness and cloudy to depression or feeling blue. Other people equate clouds to feeling great and sunniness to things that they don't want. Use whatever analogy works for you. The point is that the grief process is very much that mental atmosphere that happens around the plant that we need to find to help it through the grief process to get it to a place where it can be thriving. And so, what does this look like? So, the grief process takes 4 steps that I consider to be part of resistance. That is denial. First, most important piece. Well, it can't possibly be true. Nobody in my family has celiac disease. I don't want that. It's not possible. The test must have been wrong, or I couldn't have done it correctly. Something else is wrong in the results. The next part is anger. I don't want to eat differently. I don't want to be gluten-free. Nobody else is gluten-free. Why do I have to do it? It's unfair. It's unjust. It's not okay. Yep, that's the problem, is that it is unfair and unjust. And we don't know why some people, when 50% of the population, it's estimated, carry the gene for celiac disease, why between 1 and 3%, depending upon the study, have that disease gene turned on to create the celiac disease. I'll talk a little bit more about the stressors and some of the indicators that we think and currently hypothesize to be triggers for that. But the point is, at this point, you've been diagnosed. It's done. Celiac disease is present. And being angry about it is so important. And I encourage people not to try to rush through this. Because if you rush through anger, it's going to sit like a little gremlin on your back and follow you around until you deal with it. It will never get better until you deal with that anger. So you need to be mad. You need to feel angry. You need to feel frustrated and upset. And all of those feelings, whatever you have, is really, truly appropriate. This is the time where having that soil, that environment of friends, family, coworkers, social situations who can be supportive and help you through this process, give you space to experience this process, is critically important. It cannot be rushed. I spent 9 months bargaining my way through trying to figure out, well, maybe I have a little bite and that'll be okay. And then I got sick. And I was like, well, I probably have a cold, so it couldn't have been the gluten. I'll try it again. And every time I bargained to have a little bit or just a little here or there, I got sick. And I finally got to the point where I was like, I can't bargain anymore. And then that's where we hit depression. And being just sad and frustrated is okay. This is a critical piece of that grief process. Those are all forms that I see as resistance of that diagnosis and of moving forward. Because when we can finally get there and we work through those pieces of grief of the life lost, the way of eating changed completely, your life going forward looking totally different, that's the acceptance step. That's where the atmosphere for this little plant becomes perfect. It gets watered, it gets sun, it gets clouds, it gets nurtured, it gets everything it needs to grow. Our mental health is supported and now in acceptance. That's where I created my gluten-free romance, because I finally was able to get to the place where I said, you know what, not only do I always feel better without gluten, but I feel so much better. For me, the change was like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. The world went from gray, black and whites, dull, angry, hard, to color. and joy and skipping and making friends like I never had before. Suddenly, I was immersed in a much bigger, better world of freedom and happiness when I finally accepted that I had to live gluten free and take my own food with me everywhere, to every single occasion, even when there's supposed to be a gluten free option. I still take my own food. That's part of my acceptance practice to make sure that I stay safe and I take care of my body and I take care of myself. This is where working through those mental patterns of managing a diagnosis helps you to live well and wonderfully and flourish in a new life you could never have imagined. The gluten-free community of people who are diagnosed with celiac disease is strong. There are children's groups and kids clubs, places for teenagers that are international organizations. So I encourage, if this is something that's come up for you or a family member or friend, please look into these places where you can find camaraderie and society and socialization with other people who understand what it's like to think about every single bite of food. Is this going to be safe for me? It's a big mental load, and it's one that you carry for the rest of your life. And there are a lot of people who are doing it, and we can all work together to make it go better. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Eric's with Heart Spirit Nutrition. I really appreciate your time, and leave me a comment on how your journey is going and any other questions you have. Thanks.